Hello and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and joining me here in the Murrieta studios is Dr. David Burns. Hi, David.
Hi, Fabrice.
Dr. David Burns has been a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy, and he is the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 20 languages. He is an emeritus adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine. So I think our topic today, we're going to look at negative distortions, and I think we'll just go through the list.
Yeah.
And this may take more than one podcast.
Sure. Well, it's kind of an exciting topic, and I give a personal example of it as well. But by way of just real brief background, we're going to talk today about the cognitive part of the treatment model, which goes back to Epictetus, the Greek philosopher, who said people are disturbed not by things but by the views we take of them. And
right.
We've mentioned that previously in the podcast, that our thoughts create all of our feelings in the here and now. It's not what happens to you so much as the messages that you give yourself, the interpretations we're making of what's happening to us. And that's been around really more than 2,000 years, because Buddha had this idea 2,500 years ago.
Yeah, to some extent, yeah.
He probably picked it up from hundreds of years earlier as well.
Well, this has probably existed from ever since human beings have had thoughts.
Right. But a new twist on this developed in the 1950s with Albert Ellis, and then in the 1960s with Aaron Beck, saying not only do our thoughts create all of our feelings, but the thoughts that upset us are often distorted and illogical. And in my book, Feeling Good, I talked about the fact that depression and anxiety and also anger are the world's oldest cons, because the thoughts that trigger these feelings are almost always fraudulent, wrong thoughts. You're telling yourself things that aren't true. And helping individuals who are depressed and anxious recognize this and change those thinking patterns, looking at things in a more positive and realistic way, can often provide high-speed, powerful change in the way you feel.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds to me like when you have a thought about the world or about reality and it's accurate, you're more on the fact, it doesn't seem to create any suffering. When it's distorted, when you're not seeing reality as it is, that's when you're having some difficult emotions. Is that right?
Yes, and to me this is a phenomenally important breakthrough in our understanding, not only of psychotherapy, but of just of human nature in general. And I think people have had some kind of feel for this, even religious, going back to Adam and Eve, had this opportunity to live in this beautiful Garden of Eden, but for some reason we make ourselves miserable by looking at things in ways that aren't valid. They're not realistic. Why don't we dive into it? But I can give you and we can talk about positive distortions as well, because just as negative distortions cause negative feelings like worthlessness and low self-esteem and depression and anxiety and anger as well, particularly anger at yourself, positive distortions also create a lot of suffering. And here we're talking about mania, habits and addictions, violence, war and violence, always results from positive distortions, as well as marital conflict, relationship conflict, not getting along with people. So we can bring some of these negative and positive distortions to life. Yeah, that sounds
like a big topic. So let's see how much of it we can cover today. And so I know that you have a list of cognitive negative distortions.
Yeah. And let me just say that one of the reasons I've loved this model is not only because it's been helpful to my patients and seems absolutely valid and true. It also, I can see it in my own life as well. Like you were saying, I'm seem to be looking a little bit down today, which is
I noticed true. That when I came in.
And so I asked myself, well, what is the event that's making me down and that making me feel down? And then what am I telling myself? Mm-hmm. I was telling you that I have this exciting new training group for the psychiatric residents at Stanford. Yeah. I've had my Tuesday training group for 10 or 15 years now, and it's just a totally joyous peak experience every Tuesday night. And so David Carrion, one of the psychiatric residents, put out an email, and Dr. Burns is offering a new training just for psychiatric residents on Wednesday nights.
Yeah.
And so I was all excited, and about 16 or 17 of them showed up. And we had a 2-hour group. I showed a first part of a video from a session with a woman who experienced horrible abuse and depression for more than 40 years.
Yeah.
And I was all excited about the group, but then I made some mistakes in teaching. Like a couple of them asked challenging questions, and rather than telling them that's a great question and making them feel good about it, I got into a little bit of an adversarial interaction with a couple of them, which is never a good thing to do. I usually am disciplined. I don't make that mistake, but I think I was feeling kind of anxious and wanting to impress them, and I was so honored to have this chance for so many of them to come to hear what I had to say. And so the ratings, some of them gave over-the-top, fantastic ratings. I have a rating scale, as you know, at the end.
Yeah, of course, I'm familiar with that.
But others of them gave, less than stellar ratings, and they had a variety of criticisms. And then, so I'm just feeling kind of down and discouraged and kind of mad at myself and frustrated, and then I'm telling myself I screwed up. I shouldn't have screwed up.
That's right.
I should have done a better job. They should have been more, open to what I was saying. This type of thing. And here you see the shoulds, the all or nothing thinking. So it's happening right within me at this very moment. So
you're giving a great demonstration of this, and it's very, very personal.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's go into the distortions.
Yeah, let's be systematic on this.
And the first one, and I have a list of these in all of my books, like Feeling Good. But the first one is called all or nothing thinking, and that's where you look at the world in black and white categories, like shades of gray don't exist. And you see this all the time with people who are feeling depressed or anxious. Like before you give a talk, if you have public speaking anxiety, you might think, I'm going to blow it completely. I'm going to make a complete fool of myself. As if your talk is either going to be a smash hit or an absolute zero.
I see that all the time. I'm wondering do you have any insight into why we do this?
No.
Huh.
No. And to me, it's both a scientific question as well as a spiritual question, why we make our lives so miserable by looking at things in ways that aren't valid. But I see it all the time, and it can lead to suicide. Patients could say, I'm totally worthless, so I might as well put a bullet through my head.
Yeah.
And an example, in my own life, I was giving a presentation with Dr. Aaron Beck at what's now called the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies, way back in the early days of cognitive therapy.
Yeah.
And most people weren't familiar with it. It was a half-day workshop. And it was somewhat like experiences I still have from time to time. The audience was somewhat adversarial.
Yeah.
And, this cognitive therapy was new. Yeah. Well, not that bad, but it was new, and they were very skeptical, and they were very committed to whatever they'd been trained with. And I was pretty green at public speaking, and Beck has never been very good at public speaking. He's not terrible, but he knows that. He always mentions that. He had tremendous strengths, but that wasn't one of them. And so at the end, I felt kind of down. And it was just like our conversation earlier today. And he said, Dave, you seem to be feeling kind of down right now. Why is that? And I said, well, and I tried to put it nicely. And I said, well, Dr. Beck, our presentation was kind of below average, I thought. And he says, well, then we should thank our lucky stars.
What?
Why should we thank our lucky stars? And he said, well, you see, half of our presentations have to be below average because average is the halfway point.
Right, at least the average of your presentation.
Yeah. That's the only average that would make any sense, and half of them will be above average. So we can we got the below average one out of the way. We can look forward to an above average one next time.
That's right. Yeah.
All of a sudden, I started feeling better, and I realized I'd been trapped in all or nothing thinking. Like it's either going to be wonderful or terrible, but it's really kind of shades of gray. Maybe it was a 60% rather than an 80% or something like that. But it certainly wasn't a zero. But the all or nothing thinking is very very profound and very widespread. You make a mistake, and, you say, "Gosh, I'm a real loser," and that's all or nothing thinking. And one thing that has helped people get out of it. Because I've had a lot of patients, like with what's called borderline personality disorder, which is a very severe and refractory kind of depression, and all or nothing thinking is very heavy in the thinking of these individuals. Also, perfectionism comes from all or nothing thinking. But one thing that can be helpful is I sometimes say to my patients, just to look around you right now in the world, in the room that you're in. And is there anything that's all or nothing? Like, we could do it right now. Would you say these walls are totally clean or totally dirty?
Well, they look pretty clean to me.
They're pretty clean, but they're not 100%.
Sure.
And they're not 0%. And that piece of artwork right there, would you say that's 100% fantastic or 0%?
Well, it's pretty nice, but it's
like maybe a 20 on a 0 to 100. Do you see?
Yeah.
And is this glass totally dirty or totally clean? Well, it's got a little orange juice left in it, but it's
kind of dirty. But I've seen dirtier glasses.
Yeah,
okay, yes.
Yeah. And so all or nothing really doesn't apply to anything in the universe. So it's a gigantic distortion, and it creates incredible pain.
Yeah. Well, I can see this when you're pointing at very physical things, that everything is somewhere in between along a continuum. But when we have thoughts, usually they're about more abstract concepts. Like when you said, I'm a loser, it's a very abstract concept.
Absolutely.
And so we just tend to attach to this. I see this black and white thinking all the time. It's like as if the mind had like a low IQ most of the time.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Now, a second, you can also have positive all or nothing thinking.
So what would that be?
Well, I used to give presentations to sales groups, like conventions with insurance salesmen, and I would be, giving a talk on perfectionist script for self-defeat was one I used to talk about, because we had some research data showing that when you try to be perfect, your performance is actually often worsens. And so often before my presentation, there would be the president of the company giving his motivational talk.
Do your best.
Yeah, and well, it's second best is not good enough.
That's right.
We have to be number one, and we're going to be number one. And it's this idea: if you achieve perfection, some great thing will happen. And the idea that anything less than 100% is unacceptable, and that can be motivating to think that way. If you think somehow you're going to aspire to this great 100% status, and then you're going to feel euphoric, and you're going to be some kind of superior human being.
But you were talking about this being a positive all or nothing? What's the difference between the positive all or nothing
Well,
and
it's
the
because
negative
you
one?
think you're going to become the 100%, rather than the depressed person thinks they're the zero on the 0 to 100
Oh,
scale.
I see. So you're imagining incredibly unrealistic positive results.
Yeah, and makes you feel euphoric. Okay, then now the next distortion is overgeneralization, and that's where you use.
So I find this one interesting because sometimes I have a little bit of difficulty explaining to my clients the difference between all or nothing and overgeneralization. So I'm hoping that you'll clarify this a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. The all or nothing is you're looking at things in the here and now in a black and white way.
Yeah.
With overgeneralization, you take a negative event and you project it into the future. Using like words like always or never, like, oh, I'm always screwing up, I'm always making that mistake, I'm never going to get this right. You see negative overgeneralization often after a romantic rejection. I saw a lot of people came for treatment for depression because they'd been divorced or been rejected by someone they were attracted to.
Yeah.
And typically you have thoughts like, I'll be alone forever. This is my fault. I'm unlovable. I'll never find someone to share my life with.
Yeah.
And those are all overgeneralizations where you're, instead of saying that this person rejected me, what can I learn from this to move forward with my life? You're just seeing yourself. It's both kind of all or nothing, because you say, I'm unlovable, that's all or nothing, and no one will ever love me. That's the overgeneralization projection into the future.
Okay, so would it be accurate to say that projection into the future of the current situation is the same as overgeneralization?
Yes, and then you can have positive overgeneralizations as well that are equally dangerous as negative ones. For example, when people have come to me with depression, it's one of the worst forms of suffering. The hopelessness, the idea that this depression I'll never recover from this depression, and I'm a totally worthless human being. That's what leads sometimes to suicidal urges. And then when a person recovers, it's totally mind-blowing. And when you discover that all of these negative thoughts you had about yourself were distorted, it's one of the greatest discoveries in the world.
The enlightenment.
Yeah, the enlightenment. And it's more than recovery. It's just joy. And people have told me this is like being born again. This is the greatest happiness I've ever had in my entire life. Well, the problem there is that the person gets into a positive distortion pretty much 100% of the time, and now they're saying, "Oh, I'm a good person after all, and my problems are solved, and I'll be happy forever." And that's the positive distortion of this euphoric state that I'm in. It's going to go on and on and on, and it's untrue. And if you don't prepare the patient for the fact that you are going to relapse, well, we all relapse over and over, and it doesn't have to be a problem if you learn how to cope with it. We can have a program on relapse prevention training.
Yeah, that would be a good one.
Because that's very important. But if the person hasn't been prepared for the relapse, then when the relapse comes in 3 weeks and they're depressed again, they say, "Oh, the therapy was a fraud. It didn't really help. It was superficial. I'm really hopeless and worthless after all." And then they become suicidal again. And so they've gone from the positive distortion back into the negative distortion.
Okay.
Now another common distortion. In fact, there's two: mental filter and discounting the positive that go together.
So what are those?
Mental filter is where you focus on one negative thing and you filter out, a whole bunch of positive things.
So what would be an example?
Well, And it often goes with discounting the positive. So we'll kind of take these together. Discounting the positives is even more spectacular, where you take something positive and you tell yourself it doesn't count for this reason or that reason.
So isn't one the like the mirror image of each other? So they happen at the same time.
Typically, they do. Like I think I might have mentioned on a previous podcast, being on a television show in Cincinnati. Perhaps we didn't, but it was a morning show, and I was talking about my book, and they had a band and a live audience, and it was just kind of a nice, pleasant experience. And then afterwards, the host said, "Well, could I talk to you for a minute about my own mood problems?" And he was saying that after each show, he gets about 300 letters.
Oh, yeah,
emails.
I remember that one. Yes, I do remember.
Yeah, and then he'll get one bad one, and he kind of focuses on that bad one. And tells him, all the other ones don't count, and he just obsesses about that. I was just saying that I had that same experience just in the last couple of days, because I was teaching a new seminar at Stanford, and I had my hopes up that it would be really blow away, and I made a couple mistakes in my teaching. It was decent, but it wasn't one of my better performances, and so I'm just dwelling on the negatives, the errors that I made in the teaching. I got a little defensive in response to a couple challenges that were actually, oops, sorry, I bounced on the table here. I had some questions from a couple of the students. They're actually excellent questions, and rather than saying, "Oh, that's a terrific thing," and here's some ways to think about that, it got a little adversarial. So I'm thinking about that and kind of beating up on myself and saying, "Oh, I shouldn't have screwed up, and I should have handled that."
You probably scored like an 80%, but you're focusing on the 20% that didn't go to your liking.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of the listeners can identify with this too. Like you might have had the experience where someone compliments you, and then you say, "Oh, they're just saying that to be nice to me. They don't really mean it." So you just discount what they're saying.
Okay.
I had a very dramatic example of this. A young man that I was treating early in my career, he was a University of Pennsylvania student, and he was a good-looking fellow, and he was smart. He was fun to talk to, but he felt kind of inferior and worthless. That's why he was coming for treatment. And so he asked me one day, "Dr. Burns, what do you think of me?" And I said, "Well, to be honest with you, I really like you. I think you're a pretty cool guy." And then he started sobbing. And I said, "What thought went through your mind when I said that I liked you and thought you were a cool guy?" And he said that he was telling himself, "Even my shrink can't see what a fraud I am." So again, this is a gigantic example of discounting the positive. Another example of it comes to life. I was treating a really neat guy, but he was a Midwest grain dealer where he had these big silos with corn and
right, I know those,
and various things like that. And he had bipolar illness, and I was treating him with some medication for the bipolar and also the psychotherapy. And he was really a neat guy to work with. But one day he was very depressed. I said, "What are you thinking about?" And he said, "Well, I'm thinking about the grain. I bought like 10,000 bushels of corn or some such thing, and I'm just telling myself that they're probably all filled with worms." And so he was just angry with himself and depressed, and so I used a technique called experimental technique. Because I wanted to see if he was distorting things. I said, "Well, while I'm on the phone," I was treating him on the phone because he was living several hundred miles away. Right. And I said, "Could you just go out and check a bunch of the barrels and then come back and tell me what you find?" So I waited about 5 minutes, and he came back, and I said, "Did you check the corn?" He says, "Yeah, I looked in about 10 of the barrels or whatever they had." Yeah. And I said, what did you see? He said it was fresh, high-quality corn with no worms.
Okay.
And then I said, and what did you conclude? He says, I think I must have looked in the wrong barrels. so,
so that sounds like discounting the positive, like
yeah,
100%.
yeah.
This is the all or nothing of discounting the positive.
Yeah, and just to give you another example, because we make ourselves so miserable when we do this, and it seems so real at the time. You don't realize you're involved in a gigantic hoax. Dr. Beck was treating a medical student who was depressed, and she had what we call borderline personality disorder, and one of her thoughts was that she was a worthless human being, which is one of the core beliefs in depression.
Sure.
And he said, well, why do you think you're a worthless human being? And, well, a lot of us base our self-esteem on our achievements or being loved, and she was in the achievement category, and she said, well, I think I'm probably the most stupid person in my medical school class. And then Dr. Beck said, well, maybe that's so. How are your grades? What's your grade in biochemistry? And she said, oh, I got an A+. And what was your grade in anatomy? Oh, I got an A. I got the highest grade in the class. And what was your grade in the statistics? Oh, I had a perfect score.
So there's a yeah bet coming up.
Yes. So she explained that she was the number one student in her class, and she had the top grade in every class. And he said, well, how do you reconcile that with your belief that you're the stupidest person in your class? And she said, oh, well, you see, I have a specific skill in biochemistry, and a specific skill in anatomy, and a specific skill in statistics and mathematics, and blah, blah, blah. But aside from that, I'm a basically stupid human being.
Can you even convince those people? I don't know.
Well, we'll get on to how you change these distortions later.
We'll do that later. But so what I'm interested in here is you've been balancing with the positive side of those distortions. I'm quite interested to see what would be the positive side of mental filtering and discounting the positive.
Yes, well, would be discounting the negative. It would be just the opposite. You see this in violence and international conflicts, where when you're demonizing a group, Hitler demonized the Jews, and
Right.
ISIS is demonizing Western culture,
and vice versa.
and we're demonizing ISIS. You tend to see the other people in all or nothing as bad human beings, and then you would discount good things about them, saying, oh, that doesn't count.
So really, the positive side of that distortions is applied to somebody else.
Yes, and that's right. And you see it in marital conflict when two partners are angry with each other, and one does something genuinely warm or caring for the other person. The other person might say, "Oh, he's just doing that to manipulate me. He doesn't really mean it," and that would be discounting positives in the other person, or discounting negatives in yourself, like telling yourself, "Oh, I'm a victim. It's all his fault." So you're not looking at your own negative traits at all. And you see this in mania too, that you're just accentuating all the good things about yourself. And thinking, oh my gosh, I'm this fantastic human being. You see that in narcissism as well. You see that in Donald Trump, for example, thinking that he's this great savior, and that anyone who criticizes him, he's a bad person.
Yeah.
She's a sleazy person.
Yeah, therefore they're wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's just positive mental filtering.
We may have to apologize to our audience who are Trump supporters.
Well, yes, right. Yeah, I'm sure he has
some positive qualities, right? Let's not discount them.
Yes, absolutely, exactly. Yeah, that's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, that's mental filter and discounting the positive, and And since you're now giving me the signal to slit your throat or to shut up, it might be that we're to the end of our 30
Just don't reveal my sign language skills here.
So maybe is it time to stop this one? We can pick up on
the
Distortions?
we'll pick up on the next one, yeah. So I think that this is already a good cover. So just to summarize, we've looked at 4 distortions, both the positive and negative side. That would be the all or nothing thinking, the overgeneralization, the mental filtering, and the discounting the positive. The last 2, they kind of go together.
Yeah, that's right.
Super. So we'll talk about other distortions in our next podcast.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this podcast under the blog page, and where you can leave your comments and questions. The website has an abundance of resources for therapists as well as non-therapists, including books, workshops, a list of online training groups around the world, and much more. Theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donzel. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.